One wine or two wine is the question. Thanks, dude. We're talking about, we've started our alcohol study. I don't really want to review a whole lot. If you got the slides, I pretty much told you the main stuff's on those slides from last week. If you don't have it from last week, I'll bring some next week. As a few of you don't have it, but anyway. So we were talking about the Bible words. Talking about the main point from last week is that when you look at the original words for the word wine, yayin and tirosh in the Hebrew Old Testament, oinos in the Greek New Testament, we tried to show you how those words, at least starting with oinos, turns into a generic term. Generic, around the time of Christ, generic during when the Latin Vulgate was written. When our 1611 King James Bible was written, I tried to show you where the word wine comes from and how it's a generic term, and that you can't just read the word wine and know what it's talking about. You have to use context. That was the point from last week. We got to use context to know what this word is talking about, because up until 200 years ago, the word wine was a generic term. I realize today, again, if I tell you I'm going to drink some wine tonight, you're going to think I'm drinking something alcoholic, and that's just our modern way of thinking. But I want you to understand, 200 years ago that just wasn't the case, and before it just wasn't the case. It was a generic term. So we've been. I told you we were going to do this in 5 sections. We were going to talk about Bible words, which we did that last week. And then we were going to talk about. Is there one type of wine or is there two? If somebody that would be a moderationist, somebody that believes that you can drink as long as you don't get drunk, which is a pretty widely held position. If somebody believes that, most of the time they're going to believe that when you see the word wine in the Bible, it's always just talking about fermented wine, always. Maybe different degrees of fermented wine, but always fermented wine. And so we started looking at that last week. Let me turn this on. All right, so let's get to where we're going. So one wine or two wine. So we looked at these verses. You got Psalms 104 talking about wine maketh glad the heart of man. And then in Proverbs 23, God says, look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth its color. It biteth like a serpent, stingeth like an adder. Start beholding strange women, doing a lot of crazy things. Isaiah 65 says, new wine is found in the cluster, destroy it not, for a blessing is in it. Proverbs 21, wine is a mocker. It's raging. Whoever is deceived thereby is not wise. So we see this enormous contrast between this single word wine. And there's a whole lot more verses. If you're familiar with your Bible, you know there's a lot of verses. And I think I told you last week, there's 46 out of the 66 books in our Bible have the word wine in it. And many times you'll find an enormous contrast. You'll find it talked about in the negative light, and you'll talk about it in the positive light. And so how could it be that an immutable God at one moment thinks of it this way, and then another moment thinks of it this way? Right? And I told you as we closed up last week, the answer is not in the amount ingested. That's not the solution. The solution is we're talking about two different things. We're talking about different, again, I believe we're talking about fermented and unfermented wine. Now, a lot of the argument about that would be the ancients had no way of preventing fermentation. Which I can tell you, and I'm going to just prove to you today, that has been unequivocally proven false. That is just not true. It's just not true. I'll show you in a minute why it's not true. So, but let's talk about this. So we looked at this. Numbers chapter 6, verse 1 through 3 was talking about the Nazirite vow. And I simply showed you this to show you that even in this one verse, he broke down 5 different categories of wine to them. To them, just here in this one verse, you have wine, strong drink, vinegar of wine, vinegar of strong drink, liquor of grape. There's a lot of, even to them, he felt the need to break it down into different categories because it wasn't all the same. Right? That's the point in showing you this. And we'll talk about the Nazirite vow maybe next week, week after next, but because I had a few people asking me could they eat grapes, and I could see just by this why you would question that, but you can't eat grapes. I eat grapes almost every morning of my life. But we'll talk about the Nazarite vow in a week or two. But nonetheless, let's talk about what fermentation is. I keep saying fermenting, fermentation, all that. What is that? I'm not going to get too deep into this, but I want you to understand what I mean when I say that. So, it's the process by which microorganisms, yeast, come in contact with sugar. Okay? So inside the grape, there is sugar inside of it. On the outside, if you ever look at a grape, there's a little white film around it. It's called the bloom. Those are actually bacteria. Those are yeast bacteria. So when the ancients would get their grapes, they would put, and I should have put the picture up here, but they would put them in a large stone, cut out stone area, step on them. They would go down a channel into different vats, and a lot of times they would let it ferment. But a lot of the reason they would do that is when you stepped on a grape, the yeast at that point on the outside of that grape could come in contact with the sugar on the inside of that grape. And at that point it was called must. Grape must, okay? So when yeast consume sugar, the byproduct is ethanol and carbon dioxide. Now, that's right. So if you drink alcohol, you are drinking the waste of microorganisms, if that seems appetizing to you. But nonetheless, that's what it is. In fact, it's the same process in bread making. You know, you put the yeast there and the dough, and the byproduct that you want is the carbon dioxide. It causes the bread to rise, and the ethanol vaporizes out. In fact, if you come into Walmart in the mornings when they make the bread, you'll notice that Walmart smells a little boozy, not bougie, young people. Boozy. It smells boozy in Walmart, and the reason is because they're making bread. The carbon dioxide, which they want, is making that bread to rise. The ethanol is vaporizing out into the air, and that's why it smells that way in the morning. But it's the same process. It's fermentation. And I'm sure at some point you learned about the Louis Pasteur, who invented the pasteurization process back in the mid-1800s. He learned that you could heat food and drink up to a point to where all the bacteria would get killed off. And it's the same way they actually made, Dr. Welch made his unfermented grape juice back in the 1860s, was this process of preventing fermentation. If you wanted to prevent fermentation, you basically had to keep the yeast and the sugar away. Because if they got together, yeast was going to consume the sugar, and the byproduct was alcohol. That's how it works. So Louis Pasteur, Dr. Welch, back in the mid-1800s, they figured out, that's how you can, they could, I guess, quote, pasteurize things, and it's the same process he used with his grape juice. But that's the process of fermentation. Now, here's the question. Was it the 1860s before they really figured out how to do that? No, it's not. They actually knew that quite a bit ahead of time, probably a couple thousand years ago, apparently, according to writings. Now, I'm going to tell you, we have to remember, in our Western culture, we have to appreciate that we don't understand everything about the ancient Middle Eastern culture. We don't. I try to study it. I try to learn about it. When we did the study through the Gospels, I really tried to dive in as to why they did what they did. But the fact of the matter is, it's ambiguous to me. I don't know very much about that, and you don't either. You have to live in it to understand a lot of that. And so you have to really take things like this subject of wine. You have to approach it really slowly. You can't just automatically say, "Oh, there's wine. Let me go get some rum and drink it," because the Bible says it's in the Bible. We can drink it, right? So a lot of this is trying to understand that we are talking about two completely different cultures here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. But it has been proven unequivocally false that they could not that they could not prevent fermentation, because they could. They knew how to. And I'll show you some evidence of this. So this is, I'm not going to get real deep into this, but this is actually 4 ways that they actually could do it. They could prevent grape juice from turning into an alcoholic beverage. They could do it by filtration. In fact, if you look at Isaiah 25:6, there is a reference to this in that scripture where they would filter it through, leaving the yeast or the gluten behind. It was fumigation. You add a little bit of sulfur, and it would keep it from fermenting. You could use cold storage. You could put it in the bottom of a pond or a cold spring, and it would not ferment. And then the last way is the most common, and that is the boiling of grape juice. They realized that they could boil grape juice for several hours, and what it would do is it would boil off all of the alcohol. It would boil off all of the bacteria, and what it would actually do is it would leave a very thick, syrupy paste. That's what it would do. And there's a lot of historical evidence for this. And I wanted to put this in here. I know history bores a lot of you. It doesn't me. I love history. But these are, I told you this last week, I'm not real interested in what the big preacher at the big church says about this, because he didn't live then just like I didn't. He don't understand that culture just like I didn't. I don't. Right? And a lot of times when you read books by moderationists, a lot of times they quote each other. They all write books and they quote each other as if that's confirmation. Really, all I'm worried about is what the Bible says, and then I want to look at what people said that actually lived then. You know what I'm saying? I'm not worried about what somebody says right now, because they don't know. All we can really know about what they did back then is to read the writings of people that lived then, right? And the oldest, as far as I understand, the oldest evidence, or the oldest portion of Latin prose that we have is Cato the Elder. He wrote an agricultural manual, and this is what he wrote. This is just so interesting. This is 100, 200 years before Christ. This is what he wrote in his book, De Agricultura. Well, this is not a quote. This is somebody writing about it, because again, you'd have to translate it. But this manual, it has a chapter on the, quote, preparations and preservation of wines, olives, and lentils. Again, this is about 200 years before Christ, and this guy's writing about this. This chapter is a study of how sweet, unfermented wines were prepared and preserved in Bible times. Cato describes the use of straining or filtering wine. He describes the use of cold storage so people could enjoy sweet wine throughout the entire year. Boiling wine was prescribed or mentioned 8 times in this chapter, and it seems clear that the sweet, unfermented wine was preferred to fermented alcoholic wine as a beverage. Vintage alcoholic wine was used as an ingredient for making laxative wine, a remedy for gout, and a medicine for retaining urine. But when it came to preparing and preserving grape juice as a beverage, it appears that sweet wine was the favorite in Cato's day. Let me read you this. Greek philosopher Aristotle, he wrote this. He said, the wine of Arcadia, which was in Greece, was so thick. Listen to this now. This is what Aristotle wrote about wine. He said the wine of Arcadia was so thick that it was necessary to scrape it from the skin bottles in which it was contained. They had to scrape it. Columella, he wrote about how the Greeks, quote, boiled their wines. Pliny the Elder. Most of these people are Romans, by the way. These are Roman poets and writers, and that's the writings that we have from back then. Pliny the Elder, he claimed that he witnessed wine that had the consistency of honey. Horace, the Roman poet, wrote about a wine. There's no wine sweeter to drink. It was like nectar and more resembled ambrosia than wine, that it was perfectly harmless and would not produce intoxication. Virgil, in one of his poems, describes how boiled must produces the most luscious or sweet wine. All of this is from people that lived during this time. They're writing about the wines of their time. I'm not reading about what somebody living today is telling us about what they did. I'm reading about people that lived then. They wrote about what the wines they had during that time. I'm not trying, look, I'm wanting to be real clear. Everybody got this? I am not telling you today that all the wines during that time were unfermented. I am not saying that at all. In fact, I think most of them were fermented. I'm simply trying to get you to understand that there were times, and it seems from a lot of the writings that there was a lot of people that preferred harmless, unintoxicating, sweet, unfermented wine or grape juice, right? So they was fermented and it was unfermented. We're trying to prove to you right now that this right here existed. It existed, okay? And I believe you can see that from the Bible. Let me go to this next slide. Look at this. There's this in 1 Samuel. This is so interesting to me. Look at 1 Samuel, chapter 25, verse 18. The Bible's talking, it says, Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves. It's a lot of bread. 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep ready dressed and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs, and lay them on asses. She is sending off a feast to these men. And she just sends 2 bottles of wine. Now think about it. Now, if you're sending off 2 bottles, I mean, all this food, and they need refreshment, they're sending them off to men of war, and he sends them 2. Now, what if she sent off bottles of wine as we know it? That ain't going to last very long, is it? Not going to last long at all. Look at this. Let me show you this next verse. This is a different occasion. And when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple hundred of asses saddled, and upon them 200 loaves of bread and 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. 1 bottle of wine. And the king said unto Ziba, What meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, The asses be for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and the summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine that such as be faint in the wilderness may drink. He's telling us what they sent and why they sent it. He said, we sent 1 bottle of wine so that your men who are at war, if they be faint, they can drink the wine. But they only sent 1 bottle. How can that be? How does that make sense? Now all these probably 300 men are drinking from, in one case, 2 bottles of wine, in another case, 1 bottle of wine. Why is that? How does that even make sense? I'll tell you how that makes sense. Is because when we first read that, we automatically think, okay, it's like the wine we get over at the ABC store. No, it's not like that at all. This bottle of wine to them was a animal skin, to where they did one of 2 things here. They either boiled this wine all the way down to this thick, syrupy paste that all these Romans wrote about, and they would scrape it out, mix it with some water, and then they'd have drink, and it would last forever, because you're almost like a grape jam, right? You see what I'm saying? They either done that, or it wasn't liquid and they diluted it so much that it lasted forever. You see that? There's no way these bottles of wine lasted very long. And by the way, if you're sending some liquid out to the men of war, I don't think you want to send something that would distort vision, lag reflexes, why would you even want to do that to men of war? No, they wouldn't do that. They're not idiots. All they're wanting to do is refresh their men of war, and the way they're doing that is by sending sweet fruit juice is what they're doing. You can Google it right now, and you can write, what do I need to drink if I'm faint? It'll say fruit juice. That's what it'll say. I did it. I looked at it the other day. Fruit juice. That's what's going on here. Now, it doesn't say it's a thick, syrupy paste. I'm just simply telling you the only thing that could possibly be happening here for this to make sense is that this was either a very thick paste that they scraped this out like Pliny was talking about, or they were diluting it so much it just lasted forever. Because if it's just a bottle of wine they're just turning up, that don't make sense. Nothing about that makes sense. Y'all see what I'm saying? Y'all with me? Here we go. I'm trying to hurry. So I'm trying to get you to understand there's 2 different kinds of wine in the Bible. You got one that's a mocker. It's raging. And if you don't understand it, you're deceived and you're not wise. And then all through the Bible, wine is also seen as a symbol of divine blessing. It's a symbol of messianic blessing. It's shown to be a wholesome beverage. It's even a acceptable tithe. So how can we be talking about the same thing? God said, don't even look at it, but then offer it to me. How can that be? It's because it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Look at some of these verses. Let's get through this real quick. Look at these verses. Deuteronomy 11:14. That I will give you the rain of your land in his due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that thou mayest gather. Look, there we go. We're talking about gathering in the fields is what we're talking about. We're gathering the first crops in the fields, that thou mayest gather in thy corn and thy wine and thy oil. He's talking about when they literally gathered it from the fields. It's not bottles of fermented wine. You know what it is? It's grapes. That's what they're getting. And he calls it wine. That's what he called it. 2 Chronicles 31:5. And as soon as the commandment came abroad, the children of Israel brought in abundance. That's the gathering. The first fruits of corn, wine, and oil, and honey. This can't be fermented wine. It doesn't even have time. When you bring it in, it's not fermented. Nehemiah 13:15. In those days saw I in Judah some treading wine presses. He said, I seen them in the wine presses. This is when they put the grapes in that carved out stone and they would start stomping them. He says, I seen them treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in sheaves and lading asses, as also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. He said, I seen them in the wine presses on the Sabbath, and then I seen them bringing it on the Sabbath. It has no time to ferment. He's talking about unfermented wine. There's no way it could be anything other than that. Y'all see what I'm saying? Proverbs 3:9. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine. He's talking about the actual juices that are literally coming out of the wine presses. He calls them wine. If you can't be convinced by anything else, this is it. Isaiah 65:8. Thus saith the Lord, as the new wine is found in the cluster. He's talking about it still in the grape, on the tree, on the vine. He calls it wine while it was still in the grape. It's not fermented. Everybody see what I'm talking about here? It's not. There's at least two different kinds in the Bible. So here's the one wine rationale, right? It is the Bible speaks of only alcoholic wine. That's the thought. Everything's alcoholic. Everything's alcoholic, and because everything's alcoholic, the Bible also talks about it being a blessing. So that must mean alcoholic wine is a blessing. Therefore, I can drink. That's the rationale. And it's very poor thinking. Very poor. Farrar Fenton, he's a master linguist. I read this man knew like 25 languages. This is what he says about wine in the Bible. I know this is a lot already. Wine, referring to both yayin and oinos, that's Old Testament, New Testament, was not confined to an intoxicating liquor made from fruits by alcoholic fermentation or their expressed juices, but more frequently referred to a thick, non-intoxicating syrup, conserve, or jam produced by boiling to make them storable as an article of food, exactly as we do in the present day. The only difference being that we store them in jars, bottles, or metal cans, while the ancients laid them up in skin bottles, as Aristotle and Pliny, which is all already read to you, and other classic writers upon agricultural and household affairs describe. Consequently, the contention of some of my correspondents that the Greek oinos always means fermented and intoxicating liquor is totally inaccurate and only arises from ignorance or prejudice. All right, I like that guy. I'd like to talk to him. All right. All right. So I don't know. If you still think there's only one kind of wine in the Bible, I don't know what else I can say. All right. So one type, there's more than one type. It's obvious. No doubt about it. Now let's move to our second point. Now look, here's what we're doing. Let me see how much time we got. All right. I'm just trying to prove to you in this first point that this existed. Now, in this second point, I want to talk about this. Okay? This existed, but I want to talk about this now. The fermented wine. Was the wine in the ancients the same as it is today? Now look, I got you. I wrote. I made it this way on purpose. There's 6 slides and a nice little blank spot in the bottom. I want you to get you a pen out, and I want you to do something for me. We got 10 minutes. I hope we can do it. This is going to be tough. I don't know if we can make it, but we're going to do it. Get you a pencil, get you a pen. Use that bottom space. I want you to draw a big old line. Quickly now. Don't be dilly-dally. Let's go. Here we go. Jenny, come on now. Time to laugh. I want you to draw a big old line, and over here I want you to put 0. And over here I want you to put 100. 100%, I guess. And 0%. That's what I want you to put. Everybody there? And then I want you to split it. I want you to put one right down the middle. I want you to put 50%. Everybody there? And then I want you to split it again. 25%. You could do this too if you want to, 75%. And then on this side of it, I want you to split it once more. 12.5%. 37.5%. Everybody with me? Everybody see what we're doing here? I would have put this on the slideshow, but I'm not very smart when it comes to my power. I'm not. I can do very little. This would have took me forever to figure out how to do. All right, everybody with me? Now, this is a chart of alcohol content. Okay. ABV, alcohol by volume. So 0% would be water. Right? Everybody with me? 100%. I don't even think it's possible. I mean, the highest you can buy is like 96%. I think some kind of vodka. But there's the extreme sides of this. Now you can go to the store today and you can buy. I want to talk about what we can buy today. We're talking about, is it the same today as it was then? This is what we're doing. Is it the same? So if I wanted to go buy some tequila today, tequila is 50%. Okay, tequila. I want you to write these on here. 50% tequila. And a lot, there's a lot of ranges here. I'm just giving you averages here. I think if you want to go to about 44%, I think that's going to be things like rum, whiskey. And I'm not doing taste tests. I've had people ask me about taste tests on this study. We're not doing taste tests. No taste tests. I was at Costco the other day. Love Costco. And they have a lot of wine. And we always skip the wine aisle, but I didn't that day. I went over and grabbed a bar. I was looking at it. Casey said, what somebody at the church sees you looking at this? I just want to see what it said. I'll let you know what it said maybe next week. Rum, whiskey, brandy, gin, things like that. 36 to about 50%, I think, is where we're at. Vodka is you're talking wider, like 40 to up to 95%. Okay, vodka. Let's just put vodka at about 75%. I mean, it goes way up and down here. Okay. Now, about in this area, let's say about 24%. These are your fortified wines. These are wines where you got the grape juice that has fermented, but then you actually add sugars and you add alcohol to it to get it at a higher content. And then maybe at about 14% you got unfortified. These are like table wines. I think if you go to a restaurant, I mean, I don't think they're supposed to be over 14%. I don't think. I don't know. I'm really talking about stuff that I really just had to read about. So this is where we're at. Unfortified, fortified. And then when you get down here to about, I guess, 6 to 8%, these are your beers. Bud Lights, I guess, and Millers, and I don't know, just all that. About 8%. Well, 8% is probably a good number to put there. All right. Everybody writing this down? I hope so. I'm trying to get you to understand what we can buy today. Now, you hear things about 90 proof and all that. In case you were just wondering, proofs are basically the double of the ABV. So if you got vodka that's 45%, it's 90 proof is what it's called. So in case you were wondering about all that, but so this is what we're doing. All right, everybody with me. So that's now. Everything that's fortified and on up is known as spirits, distilled spirits. Okay. Liquor, so to speak. That's today. Is it the same as then? Now you can go read about this and you can look at what... There's actually a lot written about wines of antiquity. But the distillation process was not discovered until the Middle Ages. Middle Ages is about 1200 AD. So it was about 1,000 years after the Bible times, when the distillation process was discovered. Distillation is basically a way of separating water and alcohol out to where you can increase the alcoholic content of something. I told you all that to tell you this. During Bible times, the absolute highest, let me do it in a different color. The highest that they could get to was about 14%. That was about as high as they could get. What they would do is, and again, this is a totally different culture. I'll get on this later, but we're not talking about this multinational, multi-billion-dollar advertising here. We're talking about families that would have a vineyard, raise their grapes. They would have a jar in their house. You put the must in there, and according to what I read, the Jews will a lot of times will let it ferment for 2 or 3 days, right? The Jews will let it ferment for 2 or 3 days. I think I had this on a slide. Let me move my slides. Oh, here we go. Jews will let it ferment about 2 or 3 days. Most think it was probably 4 to 6% is what they would get. All right. The Greeks, it seemed, will let it ferment a little bit longer, but you couldn't let it get too long. You couldn't let it do it too long because it would sour on you. So, but they're the ones that would get up to this 14%. Right. This is what they would have. This is the best they could do, as far as alcohol, if you're thinking of it in those terms. But the key here is it was always diluted. Always. The Jews and the Greeks wrote about diluting wine to avoid intoxication. Let me see what my next slide is here. I put this up. Oh, I did put it in here. Yeah, this is just a picture of the old wine presses they would have. You see them stepping on the grapes here. It would go down the channels into these vats. But I wanted to show you these quotes about dilution here. This is Samuel Lee at Cambridge University. He's a linguist. He said that yayin, or mixed wine, and you read about mixed wine a lot in the Bible. In fact, Proverbs says there's wisdom in mingling wine. He says mixed wine or oinos does not refer only to an intoxicating liquor made by fermentation, but more often refers to a thick, unintoxicating syrup or jam produced by boiling to make it storable. So they would boil it. Now this is what Hippocrates would say. He'd say, a Greek philosopher. He said he also considered that 20 parts of water to 1 of the Thracian wine to be a proper beverage. Here's in the Learned Banquet, this is a play that talks about their custom was to mix 3 parts water to 1 part. You can read, anybody ever read Homer's Odyssey? Yeah, you have. You were probably made to read it. I hated it. I read it. It was the worst thing I ever read. I mean, I like reading now, but I don't think I'd want to read it. But anyways, Homer talks about, let me read it here. He talks about diluting wine 20 to 1. He described wine kept in jars for years and years that was so thick and potent that it had to be diluted so many times, but even then was so fragrant and delicious that it was said to be drink fit for the gods. Let me show you this quote. And this next quote is probably I got to stop, but I want to at least get to this. Look what this says. In Greece, it was considered barbarous to drink wine that was not diluted with water. Plutarch wrote, "We call a mixture wine, though the larger of the component parts is water. A mixture of equal parts was considered strong drink." I'm not telling you what the guy down the road said. I'm just simply reading to you what people that lived during that time said. They said, mixed equal parts, are you listening? 1-to-1 equaled strong drink. Now, before I really started studying this, when I read strong drink in the Bible, you know what I thought? I thought, I'm thinking vodka. I'm thinking some of this stuff, rum, whiskey. That's strong drink to us, right? They're writing to you what strong drink was to them. He said strong drink was a 1-to-1 mixture. Look what it says. A mixture of equal parts was considered strong drink. The ratio varied from place to place, but the practice of mixing water with wine was common. Move on down. It says, in daily intercourse, to those who drink it moderately, it gives good cheer. But if you overstep the bounds, it brings violence. Mix it half and half, and you get madness. Unmixed, bodily collapse. You can read it about the Greeks. They wrote about how the barbarians. If you read about the fall of the Roman Empire, you know the Romans fell because of all these barbarian tribes that lived around them, and they ended up coming in. But these tribes, they were heathen, just primitive people. And anybody that would ever take wine unmixed, you can read this, the Greeks wrote about it, it was considered barbaric to do that, to drink wine that was unmixed. The strongest they could get was 14%. So what they're saying is, and I got to stop, it was barbaric to drink this unmixed. What we drink as table wines at a restaurant, they considered barbaric to do. And he said, and they're saying 1-to-1, and we don't have time to get to it, which you're talking 4 to 6%. A low grade beer, that's strong. That was strong drink to them. I got to stop. But we'll pick up there. I'm trying to get you to understand it's not the same thing. It's not even close to the same thing.